In a quiet town, far from noise and crowds, there was a small convent where a group of nuns lived. Among them was an elderly nun who many didn't notice much. She didn't talk a lot, didn't ask for anything, and never caused any trouble. Most of the younger nuns just saw her as the gentle old woman who helped with chores and prayed quietly. She was always kind, always smiling, but mostly stayed in the background every morning. After prayer, she would sweep the chapel floor, wipe down the pews, and light candles with steady hands. She moved slowly, but with care, as if every little task was something sacred. Some of the younger nuns called her sister Silence behind her back, not in a cruel way, but because she rarely spoke. In the corner of the chapel stood a large, dusty piano. It hadn't been played in a long time. The wood was worn, and some keys had tiny chips on the edges. But it still stood with quiet pride, like a memory no one wanted to throw away. Sometimes when no one was around, the elderly nun would walk over to it. She would gently touch one or two keys, then quickly pull her hand back, looking around to see if anyone noticed. Never sat down to play. One day during lunch, a group of younger nuns were talking about music for the upcoming Sunday service. One of them asked, "Should we clean the old piano or just leave it?" Another said, "No one plays it. It's just decoration now." The elderly nun didn't say a word. She just kept eating her soup quietly, her eyes fixed on her bowl. Later, that night, while everyone was asleep, she walked into the chapel alone. The candles had burned down. Moonlight spilled through the windows. She stood in front of the piano again, her fingers hovering over the keys. But once more, she didn't play. She sighed softly, turned away, and walked back to her room. Years ago, when she was younger, she had asked permission to play the piano. She had loved it deeply, had learned it in secret when she was still a girl. But the head nun at the time had told her there was no need. "We already have someone in charge of music," she had said. "Your time is better used elsewhere." So she stepped aside and never asked again. She believed in obedience. And even more than that, she believed in patience. No one in the convent knew her story. They didn't know about the piano lessons she had taken as a child. They didn't know how she used to play in churches and weddings long before she joined the convent. All they saw was a quiet old woman who lit candles and folded laundry. But there was something different about her. Something calm and strong that you could feel if you sat with her for a while. It wasn't just her age. It was something inside her, something waiting, like a song that had never been sung. In the chapel, the piano waited too, silent, dusty, forgotten, but not by her. Every day, as she walked past it with her broom in hand, she would glance at it for just a second. And every time, a quiet little dream would rise in her heart, like a soft note playing deep inside her soul. No one knew what was coming. No one expected that the quiet nun they barely noticed would soon touch the world in a way no one had imagined. Many years before, when the elderly nun was still full of energy and hope, she had walked into the head nun's office with a soft smile and a heart full of courage. She had stood in front of the wooden desk, hands folded, and quietly asked, "May I play the piano during evening prayers?" Her voice was gentle, but inside she had waited years for this moment. The head nun had looked up from her papers, surprised. After a pause, she shook her head and said, "We already have a sister who plays. There's no need for another. You're better with the kitchen work. Thank you for understanding." And just like that, her dream was pushed aside. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked out of the room with a small, polite smile. But deep inside, her heart had cracked a little. From that day on, she stopped asking. She continued doing her daily duties without complaint. She helped in the kitchen, scrubbed the floors, stitched torn clothes, and prayed quietly every morning and night. She became the helpful sister who never said no, never asked for anything, and always did her work with care. No one saw the small sadness behind her smile. Years passed. New nuns arrived, full of energy and ideas. Some could sing, some played the guitar, and others were chosen to stand in front during Mass and lead hymns. The old piano remained in the chapel, but only the chosen few were allowed to touch it. The elderly nun still walked past it every day. She would slow down near it, run her fingers across the top. and move on. Some sisters thought she just liked the look of the piano. Others didn't even notice. They were busy with schedules, sermons, and plans. To them, she was just part of the background, like the candles or the old wooden benches. But inside her heart, the music never stopped. Every night when she lay in bed, she would close her eyes and imagine herself sitting at the piano, playing songs she remembered from her childhood. Her fingers would move in the air as if touching invisible keys. The melodies lived inside her, even though no one ever heard them. One rainy afternoon, the younger nuns were preparing for a special Sunday event. One of them mentioned the old piano. "Should we include it in the service?" she asked. Another replied, "What for? Just takes up space. No one uses it." The elderly nun heard this from the corner of the room. She didn't say anything. She just kept folding napkins, but her hands trembled slightly. Her face stayed calm, but her heart ached. She didn't blame them. How could they know what the piano meant to her? She had kept her gift hidden for so long that even she had started to forget how special it once was. But part of her still hoped that one day someone would ask her, someone would notice. That night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, she stood again in the quiet chapel. The air smelled of old wood and wax. She placed her hand gently on the piano. She didn't play, not yet. But she leaned in and whispered, "Maybe one day." What she didn't know was that someone would notice her very soon. And when that happened, the silence that wrapped around her for so long would finally break into her hidden gift. It would reach far beyond the walls of the small convent. It was a sunny afternoon when a group of visitors arrived at the convent. They were part of a church-sponsored project that traveled from town to town, filming stories, interviewing people of faith, and capturing beauty in simple lives. Among them was a young woman who worked with a camera. She was not loud or pushy, but she had curious eyes. She liked finding things that others often missed. As the group settled in, the young woman walked around quietly, taking small videos of the chapel, the garden, and the sisters going about their day. She noticed how peaceful the place felt. But there was something else that caught her attention, something small, almost hidden. It was the elderly nun. She watched the way the old nun lit candles with such care, how she moved slowly but gently, how she paused near the old piano every time she passed it. At first, she thought maybe the nun liked how the piano looked, but then she noticed the way her hand touched it. It wasn't just a passing touch. It was full of feeling, like someone greeting an old friend. Later that evening, after prayer, the young woman found a quiet moment and approached the nun. She smiled and asked, "Do you play the piano?" The elderly nun looked at her, a little surprised, and she gave a soft smile and said quietly, "I used to." The woman's eyes lit up. "That's beautiful," she said. "Would you play something?" Before the nun could answer, another younger sister walked by and quickly said, "Oh no, she hasn't played in years. She just looks at it sometimes. It's probably too late for her hands now." The elderly nun lowered her eyes and gave a small polite nod. The young woman noticed the shift in her face. There was something sad behind that quiet smile, like someone used to being told no. That night, the young woman couldn't stop thinking about the nun. There was something in her eyes, something deep, that stayed in her mind. She had filmed many stories before, people who built homes, cared for orphans, planted gardens in dry lands, but this felt different. It felt like something was waiting to be discovered, something hidden for too long. The next day, during lunch, she asked one of the sisters again, "Did the elderly nun ever play music here?" The sister shrugged. "Not that I know of. She just does chores. She's been here forever. It's a sweet lady, but not the type to perform." The young woman smiled politely but didn't believe that answer. She trusted her instinct, and her instinct told her that this quiet nun had a story that needed to be heard. That evening, she kept her camera close and stayed near the chapel without making noise. The sun had set and most of the convent had gone quiet. She waited, not even knowing what for. Then, just before bedtime prayers, she heard soft footsteps on the chapel floor. The old wooden door creaked slightly. Through the half-open door, she saw the elderly nun step inside, just like she had the night before. The nun looked around, saw no one, and walked slowly to the piano. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and paused. The young woman didn't move. She didn't want to startle her. She simply stood still, heart beating fast. Watching through a small crack in the door, the nun gently pressed a few keys, and then slowly, like a river finding its path again, her fingers began to move. A soft, beautiful melody filled the roomful, a feeling full of memory. It wasn't loud or perfect, but it was alive. The young woman didn't speak. She quietly turned on her camera and hit record. She had just witnessed something magical. The young woman stood quietly behind the chapel door, barely breathing. She didn't want to make a sound. What she was witnessing felt too special, too private. The elderly nun sat at the piano, her back slightly bent, her thin fingers dancing over the keys as if she had never stopped playing. The music filled the empty chapel like a gentle wave. It was soft, slow, and full of deep emotion. There were no loud notes, no showy movements, just a beautiful melody that felt like it came straight from the heart. It was a song of waiting, of patience, of dreams that never fully died. The nun's eyes were closed. She didn't know anyone was watching. She wasn't performing. She was remembering. Each note seemed to carry pieces of her past, maybe old memories, lost hopes, or silent prayers. The young woman felt her throat tighten. Her eyes filled with tears, and still, she didn't move. She raised her camera slowly, careful not to make a sound, and started to record. She didn't do it to go viral. She didn't do it for likes or shares. She just knew this moment mattered. After a few minutes, the song came to a gentle end. The nun opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. Her fingers rested on the keys. She sat there for a while, silent. Then she smiled to herself, just a small, peaceful smile. She had no idea anyone had heard her. But just as she stood up, the young woman stepped forward quietly. She didn't want to scare her, but she also didn't want to hide. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I heard you. I didn't mean to, ... but I did." The elderly nun turned around, surprised. For a second, she looked like she might be embarrassed. Her hand moved nervously to her chest. The young woman quickly added, "Please don't be upset. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The nun looked at her, unsure what to say. She gave a small nod and sat back down. "How long have you played?" the young woman asked gently. The nun looked at the piano, then back at her. "Since I was a little girl," she said softly. "But it's been many years since I played like that. I stopped when I came here." "Why?" the young woman asked. "There wasn't space for it," she said. "Other duties were more important, and after a while, people forgot I could." The young woman sat beside her on the bench. "But you didn't forget," she said. The nun smiled again. "No, I never forgot." Young woman told her about the recording. She asked if she could share it with her permission. "Not to make you famous," she explained, "but because the world needs to hear this. People forget beauty. They forget how deep it can be, even in the quietest corners." The elderly nun thought for a moment. Then she nodded. "If it can bring light to someone's heart, ... then yes." That night, the young woman went back to her room and uploaded the video with the simple title. She waited a lifetime to be heard. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few people would see it. Maybe a few would feel something. But what happened next was far beyond anything either of them had imagined. The video was just a few minutes long. The old piano, the quiet chapel, and the elderly nun with her gentle hands playing a song from the heart. It all came together in a way that felt pure and real. There were no special effects, no background music, no words spoken, just her and the music. The young woman uploaded it late at night. She didn't add many words in the description. Just a simple line, "A nun who waited a lifetime to be heard." Then she closed her laptop and went to sleep. By the next morning, something unexpected had happened. Hundreds of people had already watched the video. By evening, it was thousands. People began to share it on social media, on blogs, in group chats. It wasn't just being watched, it was being felt. People were writing comments like, "I don't know why, but this made me cry. This touched my soul. This is what true beauty looks like." The young woman sat in shock as the numbers grew hour by hour. She showed the nun the video and the comments. The nun was quiet at first, reading each message slowly. Her hands trembled a little as she scrolled through the screen. "So many people," she whispered. "Double quotes, yes," the young woman said with a smile. "They heard you." Word began to spread beyond social media. A local news station reached out. They wanted to do a short story on the elderly nun. At first, she was unsure. "Why would anyone care about someone like me?" she asked softly. The young woman replied, "Because the world is tired of noise. They want something honest." I gave them that. After some gentle encouragement, the nun agreed. Soon, a small crew arrived at the convent. They filmed her walking through the chapel, lighting candles, doing her daily tasks. They interviewed her in a quiet corner where she spoke softly about her love for music and how she had waited so long just to play again. The short news story aired on TV and then spread online too. It was simple, but powerful. People around the world began writing letters to the convent, handwritten notes, emails, gifts, and even flowers. Some people shared their own stories of dreams they had let go. Others just wanted to say thank you. One letter read, "I haven't played my violin in 30 years. After watching you, I picked it up again." Another message said, "My mother cried when she heard your song. She said it reminded her of her youth." The elderly nun was touched beyond words. She had never expected any of this. She had lived her life in silence, never asking for attention. Now, the world was listening. The other nuns at the convent were shocked too. Some admitted they had never known she could even play. A few felt guilty, realizing they had overlooked her for so long. But the elderly nun didn't hold any anger. In her heart, she just smiled gently and said, "Sometimes it takes time for the right door to open." Even a well-known music teacher from the city sent a message offering to meet her. "Your hands may be old, but your soul plays like it's young," he wrote. Through all the attention, the elderly nun stayed calm. She didn't let it change her. She still lit candles every morning, still folded napkins in the kitchen, still smiled at every sister with warmth. But inside her, something had changed. A quiet joy now lived in her heart. She was no longer just the quiet old woman in the corner. She was someone who had been heard, someone who reminded the world that it's never too late for beauty to rise again. The days that followed were unlike anything the elderly nun had ever known. She had lived a quiet life, full of prayer, service, and silence. But now the silence was gone. Letters arrived at the convent every morning. Visitors came from nearby towns, not to take pictures or ask for anything, but simply to meet her and say thank you. Some came with flowers, others with tears in their eyes. A few brought small musical gifts sold, sheet music, a handmade rosary with a musical note, charm, or a book about classical composers. People saw something in her that they hadn't seen in a long time, something simple, pure, and honest. The younger nuns at the convent, who once passed by her without noticing, now watched her with new eyes. They began to ask her questions, sit with her during lunch, and listen to her soft stories. She told them how she used to play as a child, how music helped her feel close to God, and how she had once dreamed of being a church pianist, but gave it up when she joined the convent. Some of the sisters felt ashamed for not asking earlier. One of them even said, "All these years and we didn't know the treasure we had right in front of us." The elderly nun simply smiled and said, "It wasn't the right time. Now it is." She never asked for praise. She never acted proud. She still did her usual tasks, folding the chapel benches, folding altar cloths, lighting candles. But now, people looked at her differently. They didn't see just an old woman. They saw someone strong, someone gentle, someone who had waited. A lifetime without bitterness. A big surprise came a few weeks later. A music school from the city contacted the convent. They said they wanted to honor her with a special award for inspiring the world with quiet courage and hidden talent. They asked if she would be willing to come for a short visit and play piece at a small event. The nun was quiet for a long time after reading the letter. She had never been to a big city. She had never stood on a stage. The thought made her nervous. But the young woman who had first filmed her said, "You don't have to go for them. Go for yourself." The nun thought deeply and then nodded. "If my music can bring peace to even one more heart, then I will go." The convent helped her prepare. The sisters found her an old but clean piano shawl. They gave her warm words and support. The chapel piano was polished and brought back to life. Every evening she practiced alone, not to be perfect but to be honest. Her fingers were slower now, and some notes came with effort, but the music still lived inside her. The day she was supposed to travel, a small van arrived. A few sisters came along to support her. As they drove through the countryside toward the city, the nun looked out the window quietly. She wasn't thinking about fame or applause. She was thinking about how life sometimes brings things back around, even after many years. When they reached the city, the school staff welcomed her warmly. No one treated her like a star. They treated her like someone special, someone who had something the world needed, more of patience, peace, and beauty. That evening, she would sit at a grand piano, under lights, in front of hundreds of people, but her heart remained calm. She wasn't afraid. She knew this wasn't about being seen. It was about being heard. Finally, truly heard. The concert hall was filled with quiet excitement. People sat in rows, waiting. The lights were soft and the air felt still. There were no loud voices, no rushing. It was a different kind of evening, calm, respectful, full of feeling. Everyone had come to hear someone special. Not a pop star, not a famous musician, but an elderly nun who had once lived in silence. Backstage, she sat on a small bench. Dressed in her simple habit, hands folded on her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her heart was peaceful. The young woman who had filmed her months ago stood nearby and gave her a soft smile. "Whenever you're ready," she said. The nun nodded gently. When her name was called, there was no cheering or loud clapping. The audience stood and gave her a silent welcome as she walked slowly to the piano. Her steps were careful, but steady. The large black piano sat in the middle of the stage, shining under the lights. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then, she placed her fingers on the keys and played. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. But then the music grew, not in volume, but in emotion. Every note carried a story. A lifetime of waiting, of quiet service, of dreams held deep inside. The song wasn't something she had learned from a book. It was something that had lived in her heart for years. The audience sat still, many with tears in their eyes. Some closed their eyes to listen more deeply. Others held hands. The music touched everyone in a personal way. It reminded them of lost time, of forgotten dreams, of things that still lived inside them. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She just played. When the song ended, there was a long pause, and then the entire hall rose to their feet. The sound of clapping filled the room, but the nun didn't stand for praise. She simply placed her hands in her lap, bowed her head slightly, and smiled. After the event, many people came to her. They told her how much the music meant to them. Some hugged her gently. Some just stood near her, as if her presence alone brought peace. She was given an honorary award by the music school. They called her a symbol of patience, grace, and hidden beauty. She accepted it, not with pride, but with gratitude. "I never thought I'd play again," she said softly during a short speech, "but I believe that every gift has its time, and just came later than most, and that's okay." She returned to the convent a few days later. Life went back to its quiet rhythm. She lit candles, swept the chapel floor, and folded robes as she always did. But something inside her was different now. She didn't feel unseen anymore. The music in her heart had finally been shared. People still visited the chapel sometimes. They asked to meet her, to hear her story. And once in a while, if the mood felt right, she would sit at the old chapel piano and play a short piece. Not for attention, but because it brought peace. The piano, once silent and forgotten, now felt alive again. It's like her. Her story was Never about becoming famous. It was about being heard after so many years of silence. It was about the power of waiting and the quiet strength of holding on to something you love. And in the end, she showed the world something rare, that even the softest voice can touch the deepest part of the human heart if only we take the time to listen.